Welcome to Pop Culture on the Apricot Tree, where we talk about gospel insights through great stories and help you find entertainment that is both true and beautiful. I'm your host, Liz Busby. I'm a writer of science fiction and fantasy and a reviewer of books and a Latter-day Saint. And with me today is my co-host, Carl.
Hello everyone, my name is Carl Cranny. I am a scholar of religion and I've written on the intersection of religious themes in pop culture. So I enjoy hosting this podcast where we talk about more of that very thing.
And with us today we also have Ben and Laura Pacini. Yay! Introduce yourselves.
I'm Laura Pacini. I'm an audiologist. I'm a mom of 4. And I don't know anything about pop culture, so
that's all right.
Sure why I'm here.
We had a choice between spending time on pop culture or kids, and mostly it's been kids, but that's okay. I'm Ben Pacini. I do classes at BYU Idaho, so I'm faculty at BYU Idaho, and I teach classes on education. So I teach future teachers, and I teach one class that's on educational technology, and so we have a lot of fun talking about podcasting and a lot of other stuff that's a little bit related.
And we're going to start with our best books segment, which in honor of our subject today, which is Free Guy, the movie, we're going to all recommend video games. So my video game recommendation is a video game called Lovers in a Dangerous Space-Time, which is a horribly weird name, but it's a great family game. It's a multiplayer game, and you all are in this little circular spaceship with a bunch of different stations. And there's more stations than people, so you've got to run around the ship to man your ship, which you're moving through space and rescuing space bunnies and space frogs, and trying not to get destroyed by the powers of hate. Anyway, it's a great one for playing. We played with our kids down to age 7 or 8, and it's nice because if someone's less familiar with video games, you can just park them at one station in the ship and say, just move the shields to protect us, and that's it. So it's a great family game, highly recommended.
You have to tell me what platform is this on?
This one is available on all platforms, so Xbox, PlayStation, Switch, even PC, even Linux. So,
oh wow,
yeah, it's available everywhere. So, how about you, Carl?
So the game that I'm going to recommend, I need to tell you the story of how I discovered it first. I had a friend who came over once and we were playing World of Warcraft together. That is not the game I'm recommending because I'm a recovering World of Warcraft addict and I don't recommend it for that reason. But he came over and we played for a little while and he picked up a book from my shelf and he was like, Massacre! Oh, wait, this is a serious book because it was the Oxford University Press about the Mountain Meadows Massacre. Anyway, about a week later, he invited me to dinner because he wanted to talk about it and sort of learn about this part of our church history, and we had a long conversation. And then about 9 p.m., we were wrapping up, and he's like, I have a game to show you. Why don't you come over and play for an hour or two, and then you can head home? And I went over, and he introduced me to Portal. And about 6 or 7 in the morning, my other friend came down from his from his room in their apartment to look at me sitting there playing the game, and he's like, Carl, what are you doing here? I'm like, I'm trying to beat this game because it's a puzzle game where you have to like think in 3 dimensions and use all this sort of spatial reasoning, and it's kind of hard to understand or to explain. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend you go look up a trailer or something on YouTube. But playing it from about 10 o'clock at night to about 7 in the morning was probably a bad idea because it requires so much cerebral thinking, and later it gets, the dumber I get. So I kept trying to figure these puzzles out, and it was just... Anyway, I think I finally finished it about 9 in the morning, and that was a mistake. Years later, when I played through it again, I finished it in like 2 or 3 hours because I was playing in the middle of the day when my brain was working. So it is the best game I have ever played because it is smart, it is entertaining, it is funny, it is family friendly. There are lots of jokes through it. It is incredibly clever and very cerebral, and I think it's just the best thing. It is my favorite game ever. So
psychopathic computer that you're fighting against is so much fun.
Oh, so funny.
Oh, she is so great.
Also, the song is like the theme song for half of the stuff we do in our house. So just so you know.
Okay, Ben and Laura, what have you got for us?
If I admit that I don't play video games, will I get kicked off?
No.
No, that's totally fine.
So I don't sometimes I watch them though. Sometimes I like watching you play video games. The one that I actually really love, which because I just laugh so hard, is Untitled Goose Game. And it's just a
Not
puzzle game.
the Untitled Goose Game.
I've played at least 30 minutes of Untitled Goose Game with great hilarity. It's about a devious goose.
If you all haven't played this, it is absolutely genius. It's the evilest goose. You're the goose, and you're trying to ruin people's day.
It's hilarious. Yeah. It's a puzzle game.
Make children cry.
Yes, lock the child in the telephone booth is one of my favorite missions. The other one is that you drag somebody's picnic basket into the lake while they're trying to have a picnic. It's wonderful. It's just glorious.
It's hilarious. And that's what I like to watch too. So even when my kids are playing it, I'll just kind of stand in the background and I don't have to.
And I hear it has 2-player mode now. I have not played since you could have 2 geese working together to destroy the world.
It does go a lot faster with 2 players. It's a lot easier.
Oh, I bet. Yeah. So there you go. Again, another good one to play with kids. So you can help them along and they can feel like they're doing something. Or they can help you along and you can feel like you actually know how to play video games, you know.
That sounds like a great one. I'm gonna have to try that. I wouldn't mind playing an evil goose trying to destroy the world. That sounds like a great spend an afternoon or two.
I feel like evil is maybe overselling it a little bit, and even malicious is overselling it.
Oh, I don't know. Malicious, I would go with.
Demonic.
Maybe.
Right? At least mischievous. Let's call it mischievous and call it there.
Good.
There you go.
I also really like Portal. Let's go with Portal 2. No, I won't do that to Carl. I love the Portal games. I just want to emphasize how great they are. They are comedic genius. I feel like I would be remiss if I picked any other game than this, and it is Zelda Breath of the Wild. This is not just a great game that is like extremely family friendly, really compelling. It's also one of those games that changes the nature of video games for the rest of the progression of video games forever. Open world concept. You can fly with a cool little paraglider. There are cool bad guys. There's a story. You can walk right up to the bad guy at the very beginning. I think my favorite part, so I do this assignment with my classes where they have to play a video game and talk about how the video game teaches you in a way that you're not expecting. And one of the students was like, it was so fun. I thought I was going to have to fight bad guys. Instead, I just gathered mushrooms and picked up apples and stuff for the first hour of the game. It's just really cool and you enjoy it. It's just really, really well built that way. So I couldn't pick another game. I have to go with Zelda.
Cool. Zelda is never bad. Never bad.
Totally agreed.
All right, so on to our main event. We are discussing Free Guy. I was pleasantly surprised by this movie. I did not go in expecting a whole lot. What did you guys think?
I have a few complaints about the movie, none of which at all ruined my enjoyment of it. I thought it was wonderful. I really had a great time. There were many laugh out loud moments. Like it was just, it hit all the right notes in all the right ways. And I don't necessarily would think it's something like great art, but not all movies have to be. And this was just a fun popcorn movie that I would watch totally with my kids, maybe when they're a hair older, but I loved it. I thought it was great.
My standards are pretty low because 90% of the time I'm watching animated films. So if I ever get to watch a film that's live action that is geared towards grown-ups, it's like the best thing. But really, I loved it. I'm a huge fan of Ryan Reynolds, except that I can't ever watch any of the movies that he's in. So I was very excited for this one.
Woohoo! You don't want to watch Deadpool with your 2-year-old? What?
Not until he's maybe a little older, like 4.
Pushing 3.5, you know.
Yeah, so I loved it. I thought it was hilarious. I really loved it. I thought it was sweet. And there were tons of Easter eggs. And I thought they did a really good job, kind of with all of their nods to the gaming world as well. I thought those were really well done.
I think Taika Waititi and Ryan Reynolds are comedic geniuses, and that shone through quite nicely. It was just such a funny movie to watch, and you could tell the lines that were clearly from Ryan Reynolds and clearly from Taika Waititi. Like it was just really, really cool to enjoy that. I also have some complaints, but I like the way you put it, Carl. None of them really interrupted the flow of the movie. It did not always feel polished. There were a lot of cases where I was watching something. So this is only one scene, and it's not a big deal, but it's a good example of the kind of thing I saw, where there's a bridge that falls, but it's very clearly photoshopped is the wrong word, but CGI, right? And so the guy who's supposed to be falling off the bridge turns and looks around, but instead of looking down, he looks around directly behind him. And directly behind him is not the direction of down. And it's just a split second. It's not a big deal. But the people in the frame did the same thing. They looked behind him instead of looking down where he was supposed to be falling. There were just lots of times like that. So one of my favorite, there was this great Easter egg where one of the main character uses his glasses to access his bank account, and he buys the shield from the Avenger movies, right? This is Captain America.
Yep.
Fabulous cameo. I mean, it was one of the best parts of the whole movie. I let out a whoop and I said, yeah, that was awesome.
I mean, it's definitely an advantage that Disney owns all these things, right? They got the lightsaber in there.
Yeah.
It was just a good, fun cameo movie for
Very
sure.
well done in that regard. Although this is my issue. When they played the Avengers music and they used the shield, I was like, yes, this is awesome. And literally the next thing was a lightsaber. I said, no, but you just did that. Don't do it again. And then the lightsaber, he was blocking a lightsaber with his arms. And I'm like, that's not how lightsabers work. I mean, it's made up, but still, you can't block a lightsaber with your arm. So there were a lot of things like that where I was just watching this and going, that did not work for me.
Right. So the thing that struck me when they pulled out all the various cameos from the different intellectual properties that Disney now owns is I was thinking, like, I'm glad that Disney owns all of these so they can throw little Easter eggs like that in. Because I think today, if they wanted to make a movie like Who Framed Roger Rabbit, like, the amount of lawyering that would have to happen for a movie like that to even exist, like, a movie like that wouldn't exist anymore. Like, you would never get, like, Bugs Bunny and like Mickey Mouse on the same screen together. That's never going to happen again. And so part of me is glad, and I welcome our new corporate overlords from Disney, I guess, as far as the entertainment industry goes. But I enjoyed those as well. And I don't know, it's a video game. Lots of lightsabers in video games don't go through stuff instantly, and I'm fine with that because then that means everything would be like rated R.
Also, but it still irritates me even in those video games where I'm like, I have a lightsaber and I have to whack the wall 7 times before. Anyway, okay, fine. You're probably right, but still.
Now, it's interesting to bring up Disney because one of the kind of themes of the movie is that these two really artistic, visionary programmers sell out to the corporation who promptly like kills any life out of their project and uses it to make as much money as possible. So interesting to see Disney making a movie about that when I don't know if you guys know, Disney is having a huge rights problem with, or royalties problem with the writers of all the franchises they've bought, right? They will not pay the writers the royalties they are owed for Star Wars books because those were a previous company, and so Disney doesn't owe them.
Oh, interesting.
Even though those books are still being sold. So it's kind of bad. So interesting.
Huh.
It's not like a house where if you have a tenant, the lease transfers.
Oh, no, it is like that. But Disney just says, no, it's not like that, even though everybody in the writing community agrees it is like that.
I feel like in the writer's room, there's a discussion going on where it's like, do we really want to write this given that we're Disney? And somebody else just goes, shh. This will be great. It'll be fine. Don't worry about it. Can I talk about meta themes, or is this not the right time to talk about like the?
No, go for it. Go for it. We don't have a strict format.
I have completely been ruined on movies because now I'm looking at the story behind the story, and it's one of my favorite things to look at. It's really interesting to me to look at what the story behind the story is of Free Guy. So there are a few things, but one of the big ones is you're just an NPC. You don't really have meaning unless you stand up to the system and you get noticed and make a difference. And I think it's very reflective of this weird cultural moment that we're in, where it's like there are more people on Earth than there ever have been. You are a voice screaming into the void, right? Go on Twitter. What's the big problem with Twitter? That people say crazy, ridiculous things just to get noticed. And most of them don't get noticed and they make no difference. And there's this feeling of smallness. And I really liked that they went with that. What I didn't really like is that their answer was, and and then stick out enough, and maybe they'll notice you, but also your world will be destroyed, and minor detail, right? It's not actually a very fulfilling narrative. We actually watched the same night that I watched Free Guy. I watched Wish Dragon. I don't know if you've seen it. I loved it. It's a Netflix. It was great for the kids. My son described it as Aladdin, but better. And I will just say this: the storyline is about how you don't need wealth or prestige to have a good and happy life. And it was kind of like this very weird opposite of Free Guy, where it's like, we're going to go on strike. We're going to show the system. We're going to stand up. And I have some sympathies for labor, but at the same time, I'm looking at this and just going, there is no way for everybody to be able to be the person that sticks out in this big of a society. If that's what you are depending on for your happiness, you're going to be in trouble. You're not going to feel like you're making a difference. You're going to feel like you're being drowned out all the time. And so that was one of the things that, as I was watching, I was like, this is bothering me. This is not the right way to sell this message. I really liked the Wish Dragon one, where it's like, no matter how big the society is and how crazy it is around you, there are certain things you can do, and you can have a meaningful, happy, fulfilling life.
That's a fair point. I mean, one of the conceits of the movie, of course, is that they pulled in various Twitch streaming celebrities to do their Twitch streaming commentary sorts of stuff, enhancing the very point that you're talking about. Like that it's a culture that exists now where there are a lot of people who are influencers or online celebrities, right? YouTubers. That's a job that people can have now. But to pull out my philosophy background a little bit, it totally fails Kant's formulation of universal law, because if everybody were a YouTuber, then there'd be nobody to sell groceries to you, and that's an unsustainable system. So,
well, and influence markets are by their nature zero sum, right?
yeah,
If I'm getting a lot of influence, then I'm either taking away from you as an influencer, right? Like, there's only so much influence and attention to go around, and everybody is fighting for this. So by its design, not everyone is going to be able to be a successful YouTuber or a successful Twitch star. I loved having those stars in there. I thought it was really cool. But this is kind of the thing where I say, look, if there's only so many NFL teams, we aren't all going to be in the NFL. There's only so many positions. That's just how it is. Entrepreneurship is not a zero-sum game, but influence markets are.
Super interesting. See, I thought of it from a totally different perspective. The thing that stood out to me in the movie the most was the idea that that Guy had been created with this image of the girl he was looking for, his dream girl, in his character file. And he was supposed to never find her, and then he meets her. And this reminded me of the C.S. Lewis quote from Mere Christianity, which says that our desires help us to know God. Like, I've got the exact quote here. It says, "A baby feels hunger. Well, there's such a thing as food. A duckling wants to swim. Well, there's such a thing as water. If I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world." And we see that Guy is indeed made for a different world, not this world. So that was really stood out to me in this movie.
I love that. I also want to add really quick that I think the idea that Free Guy, blue shirt guy, takes over the world by being the good guy, it was just a really fun, good, it was a very feel good part of the movie. It was you're rooting for him, you're excited for him. In fact, it was really jarring when, in a very Ryan Reynolds moment, he says, "Good blanking morning, Goldie," because he's been so
so wholesome and innocent.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think it just underscored that the more he interacted with the actual players, that he was just kind of picking up their their lingo, and including the off-color joke,
which is definitely something as a mom I'm concerned about when my kids are playing video games, right?
Yeah, and I think it was just meant to highlight that he didn't actually know the gravity of what he was saying.
Well, see, and I kind of took it a little bit different, and I like your interpretation better, just to be clear. I took it as he was maturing, and with maturity comes foul language, and he was finally leveling up. And I didn't like that. I felt like, and this is totally my priors. I'm like, but you don't need to be cursing in order to be more grown up. Like, you can just be a decent person. Like, there's no need to do all of that. Before I forget, I want to mention seeing these like tough, grotesque, like angry, like bank heist robbing, like all of, and then you find out that it's a 7-year-old. It was so jarring, and so, like, it really, like, it was, I kind of want to, I mean, I can't, there's plenty of stuff in it that I couldn't make my students watch, but there's plenty of times in there where I'm going, we need to really step back and ask whether it's a good culture to have kids that young doing all of this stuff. It really was a good biting critique of gaming culture in a way that I feel like that really landed for me quite well.
Oh, yeah. One of my other sidelines is that I write articles about video games for an organization called Defend Young Minds, which is about protecting kids from pornography and predators online. And yeah, that's definitely one of the things that I put in my article, How to Choose Good Video Games for Your Kids, is look at the culture surrounding the game. Watch a YouTube streamer or a Twitch streamer and see what kinds of language is going on. And if you really would let your kid play with those kids at the playground.
It's a really good way to say it.
It's interesting you bring up how Guy matures over the course of his development as an AI, it turns out, and I hope we get to sort of that discussion about how to ethically treat AI and how to ethically engage in games and NPCs. But just reminds me, I think, was it Microsoft that tried to produce an AI bot that would learn how to speak from Twitter, and after about 48 hours he had to shut it off because it became completely racist.
Like hyper Nazi, right? Like
Oh,
the
dear.
absolute
It's just so
worst,
toxic.
poisonous toxic sludge.
Yeah.
It was so that I don't know if they were deliberately trying to put that sort of thought in the movie, but that's what occurred to me, is that if you hang out in these areas and these video games and watch these kind of influencers and things too much, you become these things. And it's sort of the version, like you said, Liz, would you let your kids play with them at the park? That's the question. Like, are these the influencers you want to have? And that's what one of the reasons I liked that the reason Guy became so popular was because he was being a good person. Everybody was like, oh, can you do that? Can you be? I guess, huh? I like that he's helping out the bank tellers instead of robbing them, and whatever else he's doing. That was a fun part of the movie to me. That that was what got him all the attention and the likes, because I think it's pretty clear for most of our online culture that is not actually what would. It's almost wish casting. I don't know that would actually work in the real world, and I wish it would. And it was fun to see a movie that celebrated that, having such a good guy.
And that's one of the interesting things always about video games is because your actions are constrained by the rules of the game, right? You can't just go up to Ganon in Zelda and like talk it out. Like that you're constrained that violence is the solution because it is programmed to be the solution. And there are some video games nowadays that are questioning that. Like my kids are obsessed with Undertale. I don't know if you guys have heard of this game, but it's a game that you can beat either by violence or you can actually just talk to people. You can beat the whole game without killing anyone. And the reason it worked so well is because the people who were playing this game had never thought of that before. And like the moment you realize, oh, I thought I had to kill people because this was a video game and you could turn around and do something different than you would expect, that really worked in that game.
I still remember there's a very old Star Trek game. It's called Star Trek 25th Anniversary, which tells you how old it was, because I think Star Trek is now 50 or 60 years old. So this is like very early 90s, I want to say. But there's this one scene in the game where you beam aboard a ship and you can phaser everyone. And I did not realize this until later, but you can't get maximum points unless you actually talk to the evil captain of the pirates. And you say, look, we've got you surrounded. You just should step down. But like, it's a very cool, like, this is a thing I wanted to get to. The game is designed that you get more points by not being violent. The game is designed that if you can talk them down, you actually get the full points in that score. One of the things that I liked about this game, although I will be honest, I don't think they pulled it off totally, is that they put a face to the designer of the simulation, right? That this is not just, well, in games are bad. It's no, what is his name? Andre in the movie?
Antoine,
Antoine, there we go. Antoine is
a horrible jerk.
he's a horrible jerk. He's the bad guy. I mean, to be honest, I just like Taika Waititi too much. And I think every time I saw him, I was like, oh, here it comes. It's going to be great, right? I had a hard time seeing him as a bad guy because it just felt like he was clearly acting. What was nice about it, though, is like it finally said, Twitter isn't just Twitter. Twitter is designed. Okay, these games are not just awful. They are designed in some cases to be awful, right? There's no reason why they have to be that way. I don't want to go too far into Elon Musk territory, but let me just suffice it to say this. Everyone is arguing between we've got to be way more free speech or we need to way tighten up. And my answer has been like, and this is my middle school background, if you don't have some rules and regulations, eventually you're going to be forced to tighten up because it's going to devolve into madness. And I think we see a lot of that right now. And I think that that's what I got from this is like, if there is anarchy because people think that it's more fun, eventually people are going to be driven away. And it's going to if you want to study how civilizations crash and crumble, just look at your favorite online, very massively multiplayer online video game. Because these are real communities with real cities and civilizations, and they crumble really fast because people don't want to be there anymore. Anyway, I just found that really interesting, like the study of civilizations in microcosm.
And it kind of goes to also the idea that that games are designed with specific ends in mind, and so many games are violent. To jump a little bit to a different game, I run Dungeons and Dragons for a group in our ward, well, my old ward, and the campaign we ended up playing was one they picked because it had lots of puzzles and traps and things that would sort of challenge them, and not their care. Like it was nothing you could just roll your dice and figure out. Like you had to figure out which like steps to walk on, or else you were going to get zapped by something. And they really enjoyed that. And I know that Wizards of the Coast, one of their more recent Dungeons and Dragons campaigns they've put out, is explicitly designed that you never have to fight the monsters. You should be able to talk and negotiate and work through these different, the different parties against each other. And I just think really interesting that sort of a precursor to so many video games in RPGs, which is explicitly designed around killing monsters, now no longer is explicitly designed around killing monsters, and that's interesting to me.
Very cool. So
I think there's a whole sector of people like me for whom that is like the only hook that would bring them in. I just like, even when you're talking about a mythical creature, like the idea of whacking your way and bludgeoning your way through a video game just isn't attractive to me. And but being able to reach an objective without violence is really, that could actually pull me in.
So I have to bring up one of my favorite memes that I've seen recently, and it's I think this group who are listening might appreciate this. Have you seen the meme of the used car salesman, and he slaps the roof of the car and he says, "This baby can fit so many blank inside of it." So there's 1,000 of these where he slaps the roof of the car, and depending on what the joke is, he says, "Oh yeah, this baby can fit so many of these in it because it's a used car." One of my favorites is he slaps a Trojan horse and he goes, "This baby can fit nothing in it. I swear there's nothing in there. What are you talking about?" And that's it. That's the whole joke, right? So this one is the used car salesman, and he slaps, and you look at it and you're trying to figure out what it is. And then you see it, and it's a cuckoo from Zelda, and he slaps it, and he doesn't say anything about anything else. He just says, "You should run right now." And the joke of this, of course, for those of you who've played Zelda is, and I think that this gets to this question of how do we treat NPCs? In Zelda, they had to build into the system that if you attack a cuckoo over and over and over again, the cuckoos will turn violent and they will flock and attack you. And it's this little Easter egg that everybody knows and loves and is hilarious. But I genuinely think it was to prevent people from ganging up on cuckoos, because there's something weird to us about attacking even chicken NPCs, right? And they wanted to say, no, there's a consequence. I mean, it's a little bit funny, but we're not going to let you actually kill the chicken, right? There are some things that we're going to say aren't okay. And I sometimes see my son, he'll play a game and he'll just like see random NPCs and he'll attack them. It just feels weird to me. It doesn't feel right. I don't think it's because NPCs have fundamental human dignity and rights, but that doesn't mean that I feel like it's good and happy and okay either.
Oh, yeah. I'm just trying to think, like, there's a lot of innovation going on in video games with um, non-violent solutions. A game I was just thinking of is Life is Strange. I have not played this game, but like the whole plot of the game is that you're in high school and one of your friends commits suicide. And so you are going back in time to try to figure out what's wrong and prevent this.
No, that sounds interesting.
And so it's all human interaction and like understanding other people and offering empathy. It's like pretty much the exact opposite of the video game in Free Guy, right? Where it's just like, I don't care about the impact to anyone else. I'm going to steal as much loot as I want and not consider anyone else. So there's definitely a reaction to the violence of video games going on in the video game industry.
Am I just old fashioned when I feel like I'm excited that there are more video games? Like I actually really like Minecraft. I don't play it myself. It's not very interesting to me. I think it's great for my kids though. And what I mean by that is like, I don't actually want there to always be a plot. Sometimes I just want them to go out and create something and be excited about it. That's actually, I really think developmentally that's good for kids.
And that's where we end up in Free Guy, right? Is we end up in this world where there is no like score system. There is no winning. It's just life. Like it's supposed to be life.
Well, which gets me into my next two things that I want to talk about. This idea that we're living in a simulation.
Oh yeah, my brother-in-law's way into this.
Oh, well, so here's my thing is like, I find it like moderately interesting. It's not like I feel like most people that are into it are really super into it and I'm not that deep. I will just say that like, as I'm watching this movie, I said this before to a friend of mine. He said, why do you believe in God and all of this stuff? And my answer was because the stage has been set. Because I look around everywhere and everything is props. Because I can tell that we are in a moral drama. And like, when you look at the game through the lens of a designer and a designed experience, you see this so clearly, right? We are the climax of the universe's creation. We are the only beings that have a meaningful amount of moral choice in front of us. This is a great moral drama. And it's what I really liked about Free Guy is that to me came shining through. That you could see very clearly, like, no, there are things placed there for a reason. There are objects in that place so that you can use them. There are people to interact with because that's important to your story. That was one of the things that I left with feeling like, I don't know. And again, maybe that's just my priors coming into play, but I found that really interesting.
I mean, it is an interesting philosophical question. Like, if it turns out we are all in a really complicated holodeck or something,
A computer trying to figure out the answer to life, the universe, and everything.
sure, right, yes. However many, yes, whatever you want to call it. Do our choices still have moral weight to them?
I don't want to oversell this because I think there are people who are going to way oversell it, but I don't see much meaningful difference between we live in a simulation and the plan of salvation, right? That like, this is a very specific time for us to be here on Earth, figure things out, learn, grow, interact, and improve because of our experience.
Yeah, that's always been my problem with simulation theory is like, does it have a meaningful impact on the way you should behave? Not really. Unless you think you should commit suicide because there's no point to living. And that's like a whole nother thing. But other than that, like whether it's real or not, you continue to act morally. Your choices still matter to other people. So is it materially important if it's a simulation or a test or whatever?
I would even argue that I think, and this is again my priors, but my gut feeling is if it is a simulation and it is a moral drama, it makes a lot of things not matter as much. And our moral choices suddenly come into very clear focus where they're the kind of the only things that matter, right? Like there are a lot of things we can't control or that we can't control, but there's this one set of things that is really, really interesting.
Playing these video games and the way they're set up and engineered creates a specific kind of moral calculus where, like all the the sunglass people in the Free Guy movie get to just run around blowing stuff up because nothing matters. And they're training in a video game like that. You train the people in the real world to think that nothing matters. That's one of the reasons those kinds of video games can be more dangerous, and why sometimes I don't like them. And I'm happy we're moving more towards more cooperative games, or games that aren't uh, more zero sum. Even the renaissance in board games and European board games like Ticket to Ride and things like that are all like, the European mindset around games is very different than the American mindset, which starts off with things like Risk and Monopoly, where one person ends up winning and that's it. And that is simply not the case in a lot of other games that are becoming more popular now, and I'm really happy with that, both in RPGs like I talked about, in video games like we're talking about here, and like Free Guy sort of showcases, and also in board games where we see a bit of a renaissance in toward more cooperative gaming. At least that's my view of how the game market is shifting. It seems like you all agree with that in general, but I like that because this question of whether we're in a simulation or not, uh, and whether our moral choices make our choices have moral weight, whether we're in the Matrix or in a holodeck or some computer simulation. Uh, just like the video games can train us to act or think and approach things a certain way, life itself can help us also to think or act or approach things in a certain way as well. And so, in that sense, I would hope that Free Guy shows sort of the moral bankruptcy of not caring about your choices. And while that's fun in a video game sometimes, we play enough video games as a society that I would worry about the lessons that's inculcating in us as we play them so much for so long and so often.
Yeah, there's this really interesting book called Super Better by a video game researcher where she talks about the positive effects of video games and also their negative side, right? And so, like, the worst kind of video game, the one that has the most negative social impacts, is playing competitively against strangers online, which is basically the video game we have in Free Guy, right? That they're just attacking people that they don't know. And the best kinds are when you're playing with people you know in person. That helps build social relationships. It does the opposite thing, right? Like, we're not training ourselves not to care about other people. We're training ourselves to care about other people and to be pro-social.
So I just have to put a shout out for the thing that I always say in my class when we do the gamification project. A lot of people have a very binary view of video games. They're good or they're bad. And this is my big shout out for it. They're as good or bad as books, or as good or bad as music, or as good or bad as TV, right? Like, pick well, use, and here's what I would say. In our culture, there's very much a culture of, well, I can't have anything that has swears. What swears does it have? And that's just a really bad metric, right? And I'm not even saying that, I'm not saying that, I would not show this to my kids until they're a good deal older. There's plenty of swears. There's also a lot of other stuff in it that I just don't want to have to fuss with. And at the same time, I watched it and I don't feel particularly guilty. I just think that we can go a lot deeper, right? There's a lot more to whether a movie is good or not than just how many swears it has. And in my opinion, it's, what is the story telling you? What kind of life does it make you want to live? Now, here's where I'm going to argue with you for a minute, Carl, and maybe with you too, Liz. I very much agree that that the violent video game default is not a good one. I also think that there's a reason why so many different video games go with the hero's journey, and why the hero's journey is a thing, and why Campbell figured out that the hero's journey, like, why are so many different, I mean, let me be very frank. Why is every Zelda game that's popular the same exact story? And the ones that deviate from that, everybody gets mad at, and they're like, no, I want Ganon, I want a princess, I want to be Link. This is not complicated. Stop screwing it up, right? Very straightforward. And I think it's because there are archetypal things in it that we really resonate with, that we like. There's something about rescuing the princess. There's not even anything romantic between Link and, well, I mean, there's like,
sometimes there is and sometimes there isn't.
That's a better way to put it, right? But I think that there's something about the idea of defending nobility and vanquishing the bad guy, and I'm not sure that that's always a bad thing. That to me is somewhat different from Grand Theft Auto, right? That to me is somewhat different, perhaps even, than Assassin's Creed.
I completely agree with you, but I think what we're seeing here is a misalignment or a misunderstanding of the different genres that exist within video games. One of the reasons I actually really enjoyed playing the Halo series, even though it's a first-person shooter, is because I never played PvP. Like I am terrible at video games. I never really enjoyed playing video games as a kid, in the 80s and early 90s, because it was all hand-eye coordination, and I just was terrible at those games and had no fun. And so when it's PvP, player versus player, I find that very unfun and uninteresting because I just lose all of the time. I'm much more in an MMORPG, uh, like Free Guy, I was much more into the PvE aspect. And so when video games became like interactive movies, I found that really fun and interesting and different. And one of the reasons I enjoyed World of Warcraft is because I actually met people through the game and made friends with them, because you would have to work together with these 40 people to take on this big dungeon that you would go into and fight these dragons and giant rock monsters and whatever else the game designers put there for you. So I think you're absolutely right, but I think you're not slicing games into enough genres. There are interactive movies, which is sort of Halo. The Witcher is another series that I want to play through someday, and I haven't gotten around to it, and probably won't until I'm retired. Uh, but then there are games like Portal, which are more just something to explore. There are the big games like World of Warcraft or Guild Wars, the game in Free Guy. These are just very different. Grand Theft Auto. These are all very different kinds of games, and it's important to keep that in mind when you're selecting which one to watch. Just like watching a different TV series or movies, you can have wildly different genres in TV, just like you can in video games. So you have to approach it
Absolutely.
that way, and that informs your moral choice about which games you're going to enjoy. There are some games I would never play with my kids. Just like there aren't videos or movies I'm not going to watch with them until they're older, like Deadpool.
Or
When,
even books. There are books I wouldn't want my
right?
kids reading. I mean, yeah. I definitely agree with you, Ben, that like media is media and its content is king.
Well, so I know we have to wrap up. There are two things I have to just really briefly talk about. One is I don't feel like I can have a podcast episode without saying the words expressive individualism. The reason why I like the term is not because it's everywhere, but because it gives me vocabulary for something that I saw before, but now I can express, which is that this movie is very much about the hero is someone who becomes himself. The hero is someone who realizes who he is, makes a difference, gets noticed, becomes popular. And there are some parts of that that are very good, and there's some parts of that that I would really push my kids to question, right? Every bad Disney Channel movie is the story of expressive individualism. I was unpopular, and then I changed to be liked, and I became likable. And people really liked me when I changed, right? And I think that that's a really concerning thing to think about sometimes. So that's the first thing. The second one that I want to, well, and along with that, I think one of the best ways that I can speak to what makes a really good video game is what kind of hero do they depict? Who is the hero and what makes them heroic? If you're looking for a rule of thumb, that's a good one to look into. Second thing, really quickly, Carl mentioned how do we treat AIs? And I have to just tell you that this has been handled about 85 times, all in the next generation. So if you have questions, just go back
Yes.
and watch Star Trek with Brent Spiner.
Star Trek is always the solution, guys. Always.
It's always the answer, right? My wife likes to joke about this, but she'll see something that still has use, and she'll be really frustrated if she sees it at the dump. Like, that's a perfectly good fill in the blank here, right? Why can't we use that? It hasn't filled the measure of its creation yet. If there is like a ladder or something that like doesn't make, and like it has no human value, it's not sentient, but it still has use to give, and you get rid of it, there's something about me that feels weird about that, and I don't think that's wrong. That's not the same as endowing it with humanity. That's not the same as saying we need to protect this and give this dignity and human rights. But it's kind of like saying if you whack the cuckoos 10 times, they're going to flock at you and attack you. That's not what they're for. Knock it off. I think there is something in between saying Data is clearly human and you need to respect him as, I mean, to be fair, Data was essentially human at that point, right? But looking at NPCs that have no emotions, that are just figments of our creation, I think we're very quick to say, well, they look human, let's give them human rights. And I think that's actually a really bad path. I don't think we're thinking that through very carefully. I think it's going to cause a lot more heat than light. At the same time, it's also entirely fair for me, I think, in my head to say, don't whack the cuckoos. And if you treat NPCs terribly, then you're not going to be able to buy weapons from anybody in the market, or whatever it is that you want to do. That's part of good design of a world, is saying, hey, you can't just do whatever you want to all the time.
In Dungeons and Dragons, we call that the murder hobo problem, where are the kind of person you're playing, are they the kind of person who goes to a town, goes to the dungeon, kills everything, steals all the loot and the swords and the gold, and then packs up and moves to the next town where they go to the dungeon and kill everything, and like they call the murder hobos, can just run around killing stuff and they don't have any sort of like home base or plot. There's a greater push now in the game in general to be more Lord of the Rings, like epic big stories where you're trying to save the world, as opposed to just Conan the Barbarian, who just sort of runs around having random adventures. And I think that speaks to sort of what you're talking about here. It's a matter of what kind of story or game or experience you are going for, and that informs both the video games that you pick to play and how you play with them, which again was kind of why, bringing it back to Free Guy, I was really happy that the thing that made him stand out was that he was a good person, precisely because that was such an unusual thing to do in that video game that was just completely incentivized. The incentivization structure pointed entirely in the other direction. And it helps that he's actually part of the computer NPC and has to really live in this world and can't log off. But to see, I was glad that at least celebrated him doing the good thing, as opposed to everybody else who, in the context of this video game, is what we in Dungeons and Dragons would call a murder hobo. You show up, you kill things, and then you log off.
Murder hobo. That I love that, and I'm never going to forget it. The last thing that I have to say is, it kept making me wonder, but what is the purpose of being in the game? How do you win? And maybe, like, I grew up on these wonderful games from the 80s and 90s where there's always like very clear plot arc. And I think it's ruined me for life, right? There's always like a very clear, you do this, you do this, you do this, and then you win the game. And that's why I am driven crazy by Minecraft. I think it's really good for kids. I don't think it's good for me, right? The game in Free Guy would drive me crazy because I'm like, okay, so how do you fill the measure of your creation in this story? How do you beat the game? How do you make progress? And the answer is, I don't know, you just kill stuff and rob people, right? Like that just does not seem very compelling to me.
Okay, I gotta throw my hobby horse in here. There's 2 great short stories in Mormon Lit about AI that wants to be baptized. So I'm gonna throw those links in the bottom. It's Avec who is distributed by Stephen Peck, and What Have You Against Being Baptized by W.O. Hemseth. So I'll throw those links in the description so you can think about AI from a LDS perspective. We're going to move on to the closing segment so that we can get this podcast on the road. Our first rating is for content. Celestial, telestial, terrestrial. What do you think?
I feel like the celestial kingdom has changed its definition in the last 10 years. And I don't know. If I had been watching it growing up, my parents would have been shocked, appalled, offended, and would never have let me watch TV again. Today, I would say it's probably terrestrial. Like, it's just not that big of a deal anymore. There are some F-bombs, so understand that going in. There's at least one very clear one. Some of the humor is not great. It's not spot on. And at the same time, a lot of it is it's when you see a 7-year-old who is doing the cursing and they're behind the avatar of this person, it's actually, that's the jarring part. That's what's really nice about it, is that they're giving a critique. So I would say probably terrestrial or maybe even lower, depending on what your standards are.
Carl?
it's weird because I'm trying to be consistent across our podcasts, and in some ways I feel like this was worse in some ways than, for example, Star Trek Discovery, which I rated as terrestrial as well, because there were reasons behind the offensive things in Discovery, things that you would want to talk about with your kids, and part of the problem with Free Guy is it's showcasing the moral vacuousness of just throwing this stuff out there, and then I think that makes it actually worse when it's just there for its own sake and not to serve a purpose. Nudity, for example, is very different when you are trying to show it completely in a maybe not. Let's not do nudity.
I mean, we had that discussion in Wheel of Time, right? Like in our Wheel of Time episode as well. Like, can you do nudity in a moral way? Like, if it's non-sexual and it's part of the culture that
Yeah,
bathing or whatever. So yeah, I get where you're going.
I just need to intervene to say, the dude wearing nothing from the top up, I was completely fine with. That was one of the funniest parts of the entire movie. Insert catchphrase here.
I thought that was a little uncomfortable for me, actually. I was like, okay, this is weird.
I thought that was one of the fact that he was um completely unfinished, and even when he moved on to the utopian world afterwards was still unfinished and slightly dumb, and
Catchphrase.
catchphrase
Yeah.
here, right? Like, it's just, there are three things: one, placeholder, and three. Right, like, anyway.
Don't forget to put something here.
Right, yes. It was, those were fun. But so in the end,
But in general, yeah, I think terrestrial, maybe, just with the amount of violence and a couple of off-color jokes and swearing.
yeah, I'm gonna land on that.
And it's tricky because if the old standard used to be the F-bomb. And I think the good news is that we're not as tied to that, because that's a pretty weak proxy for what the episode actually was. And at the same time, there's an F-bomb, right? And there's some other stuff that isn't super great. There's also some really good messages in it. So it's just very mixed bag.
Yep, well, that's why we do 3 different ratings. I neglected to mention Laura had to duck out halfway through with a kid, so that is why we only have 3 ratings. We love you, Laura. Thank you.
I offered to take the kid, and she looked at me and said, "You are not going to leave me here alone." And so she will, I'm not I have all the dad guilt right now, so I need to run to help her, but she made me stay.
Okay, artistic merit-wise, 1 to 5 popcorn balls. What do you guys think?
Oh, 5 popcorn balls for me. I found this again. There were some parts that I just I felt the whole thing could have gone through another a draft. I think that's kind of a phrase that I keep using here in this podcast, but it's true. I think everything could go through another draft. Apparently, the fact that they kind of shoehorn romance between the two programmer characters out in the real world, like, that felt sort of weird and out of place to me.
Oh, I disagree. I think it worked, but
I loved it. But here's what I will say. You know why I loved it was because I didn't see it coming, because it was the obvious thing. And obviously we're not going to do the obvious thing. And then they did the obvious thing. And I was like, wait, no, really? It was great. There was a huge plot hole though, because Free Guy ends up just staying, and it was very, there were some plot holes there, but I did not mind that part. My vote would be 4 popcorn balls, and I will tell you why. And that is because for the first 10 minutes, the entire time I was watching Free Guy, the actual character, blue shirt guy, I was like, you're just the guy from Lego Movie.
it's true. It does have a lot of Lego Movie vibes.
And there were different parts of the movie where I was like, you're just stealing from this. This is just that, but different. And it just felt that a few different times. And that's okay. Lego Movie is selling the same kind of story of we are very small fish in a big pond. The only way you can make a difference is by getting noticed, and we're just programmed, and we're NPCs, and we all do everything is awesome, right? They could have played that and it would have fit perfectly, right? And I love that song, but there were a few times where I was like, oh, they're just doing the thing again. And so I would give it a 4 out of 5. Great, really fun, enjoyed it, highly recommend. But is it totally groundbreaking, amazing? No, I'm gonna save that powder I'm gonna keep that powder dry for a real 5 out of 5.
It's interesting because I give it 5 out of 5 because it to me it hit. It's a cliche movie that hits all the cliches perfectly in those ways, and I didn't expect anything more of it, and so it fulfilled the measure of its creation, because that's all I expected from it. And so that's why I gave it 5.
Yeah, I would say it definitely gets higher ratings on like being entertaining rather than being a great work of art, right? So I would go with 4 popcorn balls as well. I mean, it's better than a lot of the movies we watch that are kid focused or family focused that are just like, oh, painful for adults to watch. And this one is definitely entertaining across the age spectrum. So, and then for gospel connections, we do 1 to 5 apricots. Hmm. I mean, I feel like the one thing about this is that you can talk about video games with your kids using this as a frame of reference. And that conversation is so valuable for parents today. And it can be hard to do because our references for video games are maybe like not cool. We don't understand what they're talking about. What is a Fortnite?
What is a Fortnite? I love it.
This gives you like a frame of reference where you can talk about, well, why did Free Guy choose to do this? What is it moral for you to play a video game where you just kill people? And why does the video game constrain you to do only that? So for that, I mean, I'm going to give it 4 because I feel like it's a very valuable movie for that purpose.
I would agree with that assessment. I'm going to give it 4 apricots as well. Just simply because there were a lot of good moments that would lead to good conversations. The fact that it showcases the sort of vapid nature of YouTubers commenting on people playing video games. Like, what benefit is it to follow people like that?
Although I have to point out, no more vapid than people watching people play basketball and comment on it.
Ooh,
I mean, if we are okay with people watching the NFL, why are we not okay with people watching people play video games?
shots fired.
Well said. Yes, more of that, please. I think both of them are vapid. Just throwing that out there.
Yeah, that's great. Uh, anyway, four apricots for me.
You all are so much kinder. I feel like I'm a horrible person for saying this. I think I can maybe give them 2, and it's not. It wasn't bad. It wasn't like it was anti-gospel in any way. It just was not. When I think of it like a 5 apricots, I'm thinking of like very obvious religious overtones, like Prince of Egypt or like C.S. Lewis, right? Narnia. For a 4, it would be like very clear symbolism that is very deep, very, almost overbearing, but not quite. To me, this was a very non-gospel related movie that was really good and interesting, but I would have to draw the connections and I would have to work pretty hard to say like, hey, let's talk about video games. This is a worthwhile conversation. Hey, let's talk about, living, how you can stand out and be the good guy, even though, the world is built for you to be a bad guy. I think I would have to do a fair amount of stretching to, let me put it this way. If I told my wife that this was our family home evening activity, she would be looking at me with one very cocked eyebrow saying, what's your gospel connection? I'm ready, Buster. Let me see what you got on this. I am not, trusting this for a second.
I mean, it's no Lion King for sure, like, or no like Star Wars. You're not gonna have people like quoting it in their talk.
Good morning, Goldie. I'm going to say that over the pulpit.
I think it also kind of what we have what we might have here is a misalignment of what the 1 to 5 apricot sort of rule means, which obviously this is very ad hoc. We're just podcasting, talking about this sort of stuff, but to create good conversations, you could do that. But if you're thinking for something more explicitly religious, yeah, you're right, Ben. Although something we didn't end up talking about was sort of the Garden of Eden metaphor of Guy like
Being created for a better world.
being created for a better world, and sort of his jump from ignorance through innocence to knowledge and adulthood. Maybe adulthood's the wrong phrase, but sentience. Anyway, there could have been something there, but you're right that you would have had to draw that out a little bit more, as opposed to the Silent Planet trilogy from C.S. Lewis, which is more obviously an explicit like Garden of Eden sort of commentary.
Lewis does like to do that. Well, where can we find you, Ben?
So you can find me. I do lots of stuff at Public Square Magazine. I do a little bit of writing there. I do a little bit of podcasting at Radical Civility. You can also find some of that at Public Square. And I'm on Twitter trying to make the world a more civil place by being the obnoxious referee that no one asked for. And I really enjoy that calling in life. So
That is a great description of Ben's Twitter. I can verify this.
no one likes me, but I feel I get all the good brownie points of being a goody two shoes, and I'm good to roll with that, so that's fine.
Okay, and Carl?
You can find me on Twitter now at Carl Cranny.
That's great. And then you can find my writing on lizbusby.com. This has been Pop Culture on the Apricot Tree, encouraging you to seek after everything virtuous, lovely, of good report or praiseworthy. See you next time.